Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Famvestor Podcast. I'm your host, Sonny Burns.
And I'm your co-host, Sunmarie Burns. You know, we were just talking this week about how our kids really experience the world through travel. And we had a funny story about a year ago, last summer, I think it was, for Sonny's birthday. We took him to see the Broadway show Hamilton. Mm-hmm. And when we were getting ready to leave for the show and we were leaving our kids with grandma for babysitting, my son, who was 4 at the time, says, "Where are you going, Mommy and Daddy?" And we said, "Oh, we're going to go see Hamilton." He's like, "You're going to Bermuda without me?" And I'm like, What does this have to do with Bermuda? Hamilton, what is this boy talking about? Like, what are you talking about? And he goes, Hamilton. Hamilton is the capital of Bermuda. Don't you remember that? We went to Hamilton.
Yeah, there was a really nice aquarium, actually. And it was a really nice aquarium. But we went to it when we stayed in Bermuda and happened to be in Hamilton. I think I had like an inkling of, maybe what he's saying does make sense. But
the funny thing was, I had completely forgotten that we've been to the capital of Bermuda and that its name was Hamilton. But here, our 4-year-old, who was, I guess, 3.5 at the time, or 3 when we initially gone to Bermuda, had ingrained in his memory, Hamilton is the capital city of Bermuda. And he had made this mental note, and he learned this fact that I didn't even remember. So it just got us thinking about the power of learning through travel.
Right.
You know, how real your experiences can be when you live through them versus when you just read about them in a book, or study about them. They really become a part of you, and there's just a different type of memory that builds from real life experiences.
Yeah.
So with today's episode, we really dig into that. We talked to a fantastic guest about traveling, slow traveling, travel hacking, traveling with kids. It's a really awesome
and
episode.
Traveling for cheap, like they Airbnb their house when they go out for travel to make it like a zero-sum travel expense. Just some really cool stories. I mean, they don't just talk travel, too. We talk about so much other things like homeschooling,
entrepreneurship, thinking outside the box, creating businesses.
Selling businesses. He even, when he was 10 years old, started a lemonade stand, franchised it out to 6 other neighborhood kids. So just some really cool, fascinating things to unpack. And it's going to be a show that you're definitely going to enjoy. But yeah, that it's really important, I think, to take your kids on travel. We took the kids this summer to Cancun, Mexico, and then every day there's something they point out. It's like, oh yeah, they do that in Cancun too, or I don't know. It just comes up so frequently, like little things that they've learned that enriches their lives now that they've experienced it.
Right.
So without further ado, let's get to the show.
You're listening to the Famvestor Podcast. If you're looking to raise your family with intention, gain financial independence, and live a life of true freedom, you're in the right place. Join us as we explore together how to create thriving families, because strong families are the cornerstone for a world at peace.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Famvestor Podcast. I'm super excited today. We have Nate Ritter on the show. Nate is super awesome. We were talking just now before the show. We're talking about volleyball, being athletic, traveling around the world. Nate's done some really cool things. Like when he was 10, he opened up his own lemonade stand, franchised it out. I think he had 6 franchises. So really looking forward to going into that story. He's created his own apps and extensions. He's sold companies, traveled for 10 years on the road, both internationally and domestically with his family. He has 3 kiddos, been married for 18 years. So lots to dig into in regards to family, finance, and freedom. So Nate, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Sonny. I appreciate it. Can I hire you as my MC everywhere I go now? Because that was great.
My pleasure. Yeah, and sure, I'll be happy to come along on all those adventures. Talking about adventures, I love going onto your website. I think it's nateritter.com, and you have hey, if you want to sponsor us in my blog, I have this checklist of all these adventures I want to go with my family. See the Aurora Borealis, and this huge checklist of all the different so you go North America, South America, all the different continents, and all the adventures you want to do, like skydiving, which I think you already checked off, and all these different things, seeing like a NASCAR show or something like that. Anyway, just so cool. I thought that was such a cool idea, and I'm like, oh, I want to do that and get sponsored to do some of these world-seeking activities. But let's get into it, Nate. So, talking about family, finance, and freedom. And maybe we want to center or start the conversation on this entrepreneurial journey as you started as a young kid and where you even got these ideas, because that's not a typical thing for a 10-year-old. Sure, maybe make a lemonade stand, but to franchise that out,
that's another level.
That is another level. So what's different about you that made you think forward like that? And what's
thinking outside the box? Tell us your story.
Yeah.
If I had an answer to that, I'd probably be on, I don't know, all kinds of other shows too. So, but I don't, to be honest, I don't know necessarily what the difference is. And even this year, I was talking to my wife about things, and she's like, and I keep saying like, well, don't people think like this? And she's like, no, nobody thinks like that. Stop saying it. Like, oh, okay. So. Like, I just think that everybody thinks that way, but they don't. So it's okay.
So what about the lemonade stand? Like, where'd that come from?
Yeah, I think that part of it was a good combination of my dad, who was very stable. He worked for a state company or the state. And then my mom, who was really, really creative. And she always was like, oh, let's draw. We had a big, huge roll of butcher paper that was probably as big as my head, and we would stretch it out across the entire floor, and then we would just draw things like maps of for cars, and I mean anything. We could draw anything, and she would teach us techniques, and so it was a nice combination of both of those kinds of things. And for some reason, I don't know why, but there's like things that happen, like the lemonade stand bit was for some reason, I had designed it. I don't even know what the reason was, but I thought, well, everybody comes. We had this community mailbox, right? So everybody comes to the community mailbox as they're driving into kind of this suburbia cul-de-sac area. And I thought, well, if you're going to sell something, you got to be where the people are, right? So I set up right next to the lemonade stand, almost obligating them, right?
So is this a small town you grew up in, a community mailbox? That sounds so unusual to me.
Well, it was a bigger town, but it was a suburbia type of development, right?
Okay.
So it was in Northwest Washington, and it was a pretty good sized town. But yeah, people would come down this one way to get into the development, and they would stop to get their mail on their way home, right? Or on their way in and out. And so I just thought that's a great place to be there. And what I didn't realize was I was almost obligating them as they drive by this kid who's selling lemonades. And like, you can't pass the neighborhood kid and not give him a quarter,
shame
right?
in that.
Yeah.
Nope.
You learn quickly, location. That's what it's about.
Yeah. So I made a good amount of money with that, and I was like having a good time. And my friends were like, "How did you make all that money?"
Okay, what's a good amount of money here? How much you're making a day here?
Well, I would say I was probably making, I'd say $20 maybe. Like
$20
for a
a day as a
10-year-old, that's
10-year-old.
pretty good.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yep.
And
And what about? Do you have siblings? Did they want to cash in on this? How'd that go?
My brother was helping me out, but my brother's mentally handicapped, and so I was just kind of like working with him together, and we were like we were sharing it. We would buy things together or whatnot, but we were doing it together as as two brothers, and
awesome.
Yeah, so we had our friends would come and be like, "Where are you getting all this money?" And then they'd realize, "Oh, we were out there doing the lemonade stand," and they're like, "Wait a minute, we've done lemonade stands, and we don't make that much money in the past." And so I said, "To tell you what, I'll tell you my trick," which I'm literally standing there at the place, right? "I'll tell you my trick if you give me half of the proceeds." And they were like,
half?
"All right."
Whoa, okay.
I mean, I didn't have anything to go on, so I was like, that's a number. So they're like, great. And so at the end of it, there was 6 different mailboxes all around the entire community, and it was it was bigger. And so there's like 6 different entrances with 6 different mailboxes. So everybody had one. And at the end of the day, I just collected all the money and divvied it up. And so I just showed them, this is how you make it, and this is where you go buy it, and this is the jars and whatever you need, and how to set it up, and what to write on the signs. And it didn't take much, obviously, but it was fun. Yeah, we made a good money.
So awesome.
I love that.
And that was all like an agreement, 50% cut, handshake, and done.
Yeah.
And you taught them how to do it.
Yeah.
How long did that go on for? Was that like a one summer deal, or?
Yeah, it was a couple weekends when it was warm, and in the Northwest, it's warm for maybe a month or two when you can really do something like that. So yeah, I would say probably like maybe 4 weeks or something like that, like just mostly on the weekends. So yeah.
Okay. I love that though. That and what you brought up in the beginning too, like I feel there are different ways of thinking, and if you have a certain mind that thinks creatively like this, you assume everyone else must also be thinking the same thing, but it's not in fact true. There's different ways our minds are wired. Some people have stronger skills at these kind of entrepreneurial endeavors. Like Sonny is very good at it. And a lot of times it comes up with these ideas that just blow me away. I was like, whoa, I never would have thought of that.
It's a good match though, right? You got to have the stability and the crazy at the same time. Like you got to, there's even there's this bit of philosophy that I've kind of been working on in my head about like, and I've read about, and it's really interesting how you have like the dynamic, the thing that changes constantly, and you have to have that, but you also have to have the stable, right? The dynamic challenges the stable rules, and then the stable is the thing that holds the dynamic, down on like earth, right? And that you have to have that friction, and it is friction, right? There is definitely friction there, but you have to have both, and
it completes the circle. I'll say like he's more abstract thinking and comes up with a lot of these concepts and new ideas, innovative ideas, and I'm more concrete. But I feel like the areas I'm concrete in, he struggles with. Like if I'm laying out a kitchen design, I can size out the cabinets perfectly, know exactly how it looks.
I just leave it to her.
And he's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I can't visualize this, but you clearly know. So different talents.
Right. We got to have all of them.
Right.
So I'm sure there's a journey here. You start at 10 years old. I'm sure that kind of progresses forward. But I'm curious, we're talking about complementary characteristics. You've been married 18 years. How does that work out? You've done some crazy things like these traveling for 10 years. Maybe we can dig into that a little bit. And like, is that your idea? Was your wife on board? You had to push her? What's the dynamic between you and your wife?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we actually started, we had a tumultuous dating relationship. Most people say their first year is like the hardest. Ours was the dating relationship, and it was just mostly my own, issues. And but when we got married, we came together and we said, if we're gonna do this, like we really need to like set some foundational things, right? And one of those things ended up being travel, and we were like, okay. Before we got married, she had already traveled Europe. She had backpacked. She had lived in Sweden. So she had done a bunch already, and I had never been to Europe. And so but I had been around the US. And so we said, oh, we'll trade, right? And like, I'll show you around the US and you show me around Europe. And we thought that was fun. But the thing is that we even talked about like, what are we going to do if and when we had kids? And we hadn't made that a foregone conclusion quite yet. So when we came together, we said one of those critical pieces was travel. And we said, well, how are we going to handle this with our kids? And how do we define success? And like all of these kinds of things. And so the piece with travel was so important to us that we said, if and when we had kids, they're going to fit into our lives and what we do. And if that means that we're traveling around, then so be it. We're not going to like say, Johnny's got to have a nap. And so we got to rush home at like 5 o'clock or whatever it is. And it's just, like kids are flexible. They bounce. They're like, they adapt really, really well. And so that kind of set us in motion with like, we're going to travel. Like it was almost like a preset thing. Like we knew we were going to travel. It was just a matter of when. And so after we got married, it took us 2 years and to get fed up with where we were at and just decided, all right, this is it. We're done here. And we moved and we said, 2 years from that date, we're going to leave and we're going to go to France and we're going to try and live there.
Wow.
That was kind of the crux of it all. And that's what started it. And we actually hit that date, which was kind of surprising for me because I'm not really one for deadlines or timeframes so much, but that's how it worked out. And then from there, we kind of just, started bouncing around quite a bit, but the entrepreneurial piece, helps with that, right? Like, especially I'm into technology. I'm a chief technology officer. So it's really nice right now, especially this day and age where you can basically do that anywhere. And so that's what we did. We had that freedom to do that at that point. And it really allowed us to make choices to go and do whatever we want, wherever we want. So it was really nice.
I love that.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing that because we also kind of made that conscious decision where, we didn't want to be tied down to bedtime routines and yeah, sure, we have our own bedtime routines, but I guess like time frames and to delay like adventure for our family. We really wanted to make that paramount as opposed to like a structured day schedule. And I feel like that really just gave us the freedom, as at 6 months old, we took our son to 7 different countries through Europe. And that was such an adventure. And we've continued, like, I think he's been to like 13 countries at this point. He's only 5, and yeah, just it's cool. And he has memories of, you know, going to Bermuda, going to Puerto Rico, and all these different places. And yeah, I think it's really, really important, something that we want to continue to do. So that's very cool that you guys took that stance. And for us, I'm very glad we did.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think it's such a big deal to travel. I think, and you know, I don't know. I think it's a mind shifting moment when you get into somebody else's shoes and you see what they value and what they deal with on a regular basis. That's so different. And it's like, you might even have completely different viewpoints on and opinions on life, and yet they're living just perfectly fine and they're very happy, right? And you're like, but how can you be happy if you think this way? And you're like, oh, that's just the way it is. That's just life. That's culture, and it's okay. It's okay and it's good that you have this completely different viewpoint,
right?
Yeah,
on things, and that's how it works. And so, yeah, the travel thing is such a big deal for us.
You're so right on that. It really does broaden your horizons, and that's such a valuable thing to be able to instill, not only in your own lives, but especially in your kids' lives, you know, allowing that open-mindedness that really can only come from world travel experience. That being said, though, you know, I feel like a lot of people do talk about dreaming to travel, but yet very few actually turn it into a reality. And there's various reasons why, you know, they may be placing limitations on themselves, thinking, oh, I can't afford it. Oh, I don't have the time for it. My rigid lifestyle won't allow
you can't travel
the flexibility.
with kids.
I have kids, therefore I can't. So I'm curious to dig into, you know, how did you structure your life to allow you that? I mean, you have already stated that you have a business that you can do on the go. It doesn't really matter what country you're in. So that's a big plus.
But what about, you know, having a 10-year-old, 7-year-old, and now 9-month-old? You know, you have to deal with schools and things like that. What are you doing, Nate?
Yeah, so we've been homeschooling since day one.
Nice.
So yeah, it was interesting to get there. I think we didn't even intend it originally. We got to the age where, you know, our oldest it was time for, he had gone through some schooling that was like a preschool and like a first grade in the town that we were in. It was a small town, and that was fine, but it was a really tiny little school that was kind of attached to and used the church that we were in. And that worked really well, but they only went for preschool and first grade. And then it was kind of, after that, they didn't have the teachers and the curriculums and things like that. So it was at that point that I looked over at my wife and I said, well, I guess it's time to put Kai into school. And she just kind of like stared at me like, that doesn't sound right. Like, I don't want that to happen. And so we started talking about it a little bit, and she's like, I'm thinking about, you know, homeschooling. And I can say this even if she was in the room here, but I looked at her and I said, you want to do homeschooling? I'm like, babe, you realize like that takes patience and the ability to teach somebody. And those are two things that you really are not good at. And she's like, I know, but I'm going to take it as a personal challenge. And I said, great. Okay, let's try it out for a year and see what happens. And luckily enough for us, her sister-in-law had already been through curriculums, and she was an educator anyway, and she was homeschooling her kids. And so we kind of went in the same direction that they did with curriculum. But then from that point forward, she's just been killing it. Like, she's taken it as the personal challenge. She's completely succeeded. She's loving it. Like, it's hard, of course, right? But it's doing what we want to do, and it gives us all the flexibility to continue to travel or go where we need, or, you know, jump from one location to another. So yeah, that's fit into our structure. That wasn't unintended, but it ended up great. So yeah. It works out perfectly for us.
That's so cool. And I'm wondering, you were kind of talking about, so prior to, you know, this decision to homeschool, was your wife working? Was there any kind of financial constraints that you were working with on that decision?
So she was working up until we had kids, and that was kind of the plan. She had said she'd never really enjoyed much of the work that she'd ever found. And it was always something where she was always thinking about the employer, and she was like, why am I doing this for them? And I think in a way she almost had like the mentality that that I have with being an entrepreneur is very similar in that respect, right? But she's like, I'm doing
I don't
all
want
these
to fulfill
things.
someone else's dream.
Yeah.
Why not fulfill my own dreams?
Yeah. And she doesn't necessarily desire to go out and build a business or do all of these kinds of things, but she kind of gets it in the sense that it's like, well, I'm working for you and you're making all this money and I'm making like nothing, and I don't even like working for you. Like, I don't like the things that I'm doing. And so anyway, when we had kids, it just naturally fit. She's like, I just want to stay at home with them. I think that is the most important thing I could be doing. And if we can do that, if we can support that, let's do it. And I was like, I'm all for it. I'm good with this because I'm happy to have the challenge to support, the family. Like, I don't mind. I like the challenge anyway.
Yeah. I love that. And I can definitely resonate with that as well. It isn't an easy choice for a family to decide to pursue homeschooling because there's a lot of sacrifice there. It's a 24/7 full-time investment, and you don't go home, from that job and take a break.
Just another thing to wake up to.
And but as your wife said, like it is the most important thing you can invest into. So if you have the flexibility and freedom and know how to structure your life in such a way that you are able to, it really does provide wonderful options for a more flexible lifestyle.
For sure. Yeah. There's been so many people that I've talked to recently, especially with COVID, but even prior to COVID, that, there's so many families that are like, I want to go experience and travel and everything, and we want to take our kids, but they're in school. And so how do we do this homeschool thing? And they're looking for that kind of avenue and as to how to do it, because they want to fulfill some other thing that probably will give them as much or more experience and better for their kids, hopefully, than sitting in school and learning, rote material all day long from somebody who's also teaching 50 other people and has their own life. Right. So it's when you can experience it all together. I think also in terms of the curriculum that we have, everything is very holistic. And so, if you, for instance, you could look at a painting, you could draw the painting, right? So you're getting art skills. You could count the petals. You can count, look deeply into the photograph. You could see the beauty of it. You can also see the nature of it. You can see the organization of it. You can see the both the art, but also the structure, right? So, and then you can see the chemistry of all the other things that are going on. So there's like with one thing, you can see this huge amount of what we teach in school that we would normally break up. But why do we break it up? It's almost like we've broken it up.
Right.
Nature isn't broken that way.
Right. And in real life, it's not usually that defined.
But it's easy for the teacher to have 1 hour, different lesson plans and things like that.
Just curious, what curriculum do you use with your kids?
So we use one called Classical Conversations.
Okay. I was just talking to a friend about that.
That's what we're on right now, and we're pretty sure we're going to stick with it. Our oldest is now into one of the later stages where it gets quite a bit more difficult, diagramming sentences and things like that, which is being that kind of out of the box thinker, right? We're like, do we really need to do this? Like, where in college have I ever needed to diagram a sentence? When have I ever needed to do that in life? Yeah.
I hated diagramming sentences growing up. Man.
Yeah. Oh, so you did see? I never did that. But that's probably why I was terrible at English.
Sunray was homeschooled K through 12, so yeah.
So that's.
But I still
where it must come
diagram
from,
sentences.
Gotcha.
No, it was interesting what you were saying about the whole like curriculum, because right now, and like our son has been so like Pokemon crazy for the last like half a year or so. But we've kind of nurtured it. Like he always comes to me like asking me to print him Pokemon, and I print him like little coloring Pokemon sheets, and then he colors them. He writes the name, and he's 5, so he's like writing his letters and writing the name of the Pokemon individually. And and it's just like he colors in. He's gotten to be such a good drawer. Like he just got a sketch pad, and he's already like
it's really improved his fine motor skills,
right,
as well as his
writing
letter
ability.
Awareness and writing ability,
and pronunciation.
Reading ability.
So it's just like it's something he's so super interested in, and so we'll do like probably only like an hour and a half a day of a structured curriculum, and then he goes off and he does what he loves, which is coloring these Pokemon, writing down the names, and then taping them all over his room. But just so many opportunities like that. And I'm curious to know, because I know you're a big time traveler, your family loves to travel. I feel like there's so many advantages when you can homeschool. You don't have to just travel during, July and August. You can travel whenever you want. Do you guys take advantage of that? And can you share like maybe your favorite travel story or anything like that?
Yeah, sure. So we used to travel every other year. We'd do an international trip, and then on the off years we'd do 5 or 6 domestic trips.
Oh,
so
like that.
it was nice. And Summary, you mentioned like the expense of it, and I want to make a quick note here. We didn't pay for any of them.
Oh,
was
we have to dig into that.
Yeah, this was all. I mean, we paid the taxes and fees for flights, and whatever. But for the most part, we didn't pay really the basic that you would pay ever. For about 10 years, we didn't pay for any of those travels, and so I think the one that sticks out in my mind the most was, other than when we tried to move to southern France, I look back on that fondly, but in the moment it was not fond at all. But afterwards we had taken a trip to Paris, and we stayed there for a month. And again, like, accommodations were free. The flight was, we had to pay for Asher, our youngest at the time, because he was considered an infant, and you had to pay like the taxes and fees for him, but everything else was covered. And it ended up being because of him, normally, which it would be completely free, but because of him, it cost us, I think, $250. I think maybe something like that.
I think international trips, even if they're a lap infant, they charge you 10%, which it was just like, ugh.
It's like,
Because that was also like our major expense when we went to Europe, because we had to
Was the
pay
lap
for the
infant.
lap infant. And I'm like, they're supposed to be free.
Right, exactly, yeah. But that was probably our favorite because we were able to be there. I was working remote. I just remember we had this like habit. So my wife is gluten intolerant, and we had heard this story about the kind of France being the breadbasket of Europe, and that they didn't allow GMO and like all this stuff. And so we weren't quite sure exactly what the issue was. But so our habit every morning, because when we got there, we learned that she could actually eat the croissants and the bread and not have a problem.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So, and in fact, side note, Trader Joe's has croissants, and they are actually made from France and shipped over.
Oh.
And if you're well, I'm not going to say if you're celiac, but if you're gluten intolerant, you may be able to still eat those.
Wow.
Because they're literally the same recipe, same flour, same everything. And so when we tested that theory, and because she was like, well, if I'm going to do croissants, then I'm going to do croissants, right?
Yeah.
So every morning I would get Kai up, and we'd go down, and we'd go to the baker in the coffee shop, and we'd order croissants, and a chocolate one for him, and a couple for myself, and a couple for her, and we come back and just tear into them. And every day we had croissants and baguettes, and I mean, we'd go to the park, and it was just this. It felt like we belonged there almost.
Yeah.
It was just such a nice experience. And then in the afternoon, and I'm kind of an evening person anyway, so we'd get home, and maybe like 5 or 6 o'clock, I'd scarf down some dinner, and then I'd start my my day. Well, I was running a business, but I'd start my day, and I'd go until like just couldn't anymore. And it was maybe midnight or something like that. And I would be like, I'm done. I'm too tired. I got to close the laptop, go to sleep, wake up the next morning, whenever. And we'd end up going to a park or see a site or whatever. And it was just so relaxing through the whole day. So that was by far one of our best experiences was that month.
I love that. And I love that, you got out of the 9 to 5 mental block, and you found a way around this where you can experience traveling in a new place, and then in the evening hours when you wouldn't be doing anything anyway other than maybe TV or sleeping or spacing out, that's when you have your most productive hours. It's a good plan.
Yeah,
so
I
am super curious, because you mentioned that you did all this traveling and didn't have to pay for any of it, and I'm also very curious about how you might have pulled that off in terms of accommodations for like a month in Paris. How
Right,
is
because
that
we've
possible?
done pretty well with like airline miles and things, which I'm assuming is how you did the getting there. But then the housing, we've never been too good with.
Let's dig into all of it. Let's dig into the flights, the transportation.
All right. Yeah. So I'll caveat this conversation a little bit because I'm not sure how much of this can work today. Because I've looked around, and some of the ways that we've done this in the past were we were lucky that it happened when it did, and we were looking for it, and we ended up getting the results we wanted. But I don't know unless something new comes out, which I'm always kind of paying attention to it. I'm not sure how much you could do the same exact situation that we did, but yes, you're right. So the flights with the credit card churning, I'm sure that you've done I think you had a travel hacking
episode, one of our earlier ones. I think episode 2.
Yeah. And then you had another one that was recent too. And so, all of the conversations around the travel hacking with the credit card churning and the points and how to kind of like collect all those. I started doing that years ago, and that's really how I was taught that. I didn't come up with it obviously myself, but somebody who had done it taught me, and I thought it was a scam at first. I was like, this is ridiculous.
I thought the same.
There's no way they're going to let me on the plane, right?
Yeah.
So they're like, nope, you're good to go.
I told Sunmi, I'm like, we're going to go to Japan for free. And she's like, no, that's not happening. I'm like, just sign up for this credit card. I'll sign up for it too.
What is this, a
and we
timeshare?
went for like $45 to Japan for free, 65,000 miles each.
Totally. I sign up my wife all the time. I just text her. I'm like, hey, I signed you up for a new credit card.
Yeah, we do the same thing.
Yeah.
How many credit cards do you think you've opened up in your lifetime? You and your wife, how many credit cards?
Well, I don't even know. I mean, I can tell you.
Is it over 50, you think?
Easily.
Yeah.
I think at one point we had 16 open one time.
Wow.
So we were really going through it. And we had that for probably 2 or 3 years of doing that. So like we were really going through them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how we got the flights, all the points, and happy to go into that. But I think there's a lot of conversation around those. The accommodations was special. We wanted to do the home exchange type of thing, and my wife was nervous about it because it was like, well, I don't really want to open up my home, but I was like, let's see, let's just try some things out. So I went and looked, and what we found was there was a couple new startups that were coming around. One of them was called Love Home Swap. I don't know if you heard of them, but they were out of the UK, and they were really, when they're a startup like this, and being a part of the startup world, I completely understand what they're trying to accomplish here, right? But they want people into their network. The problem is they have a two-sided network. You have to have the inventory for people to care that it exists and works, right? And so what they were doing is they were saying, well, come to our platform, sign up, post a listing, and we will give you X number of points. And you don't even have to rent it. But if you rent it, or if you swap, or if you can do the exchange, or you can go somewhere else and spend your points. And it was points and mutual exchanges. And I thought, okay, well, let me check this out. And yeah, there was no need to actually rent the thing. And they basically gave you like 2 weeks worth of free points.
Wow.
And I was like, okay. And then they also had a thing where you could buy, it was something like every house that they had on it was something like $50 a night. I mean, even these like ridiculous penthouses, or like these huge places that were like 6,000 square foot villas were $50. I was like, oh, we're doing this, So we bought some of that, but we didn't buy a ton. But what we ended up doing was we actually had a rental unit attached to our house. And so we would both flip into the Airbnb and also do the home exchange and just collect the points. So we ended up collecting quite a lot that way. But in terms of the points that we would get, we did it twice, once with Love Home Swap, and I'm blanking on the other service that we did, but they also gave us a whole swath of points. And so for the combination, we were able to eventually Love Home Swap got bought by Home Exchange. And with that combination, we were able to use both of those and kind of bounce in and out and around. And then we started to find the same places on both, the same place that we wanted to stay at on both services. So we would just contact them and say, hey, Yeah, or we'd say, hey, we'll do this and that, and can we negotiate a deal? And they were like, yeah, sure. And so that's how we did a lot of our accommodations for long term. And we like the slow travel type of methodology. So try to go for 3 weeks at least.
So just to clarify, I know you listed it on these sites, but did it actually get rented by a foreigner to come stay at your home while you were?
Eventually it did,
Okay.
but I would say that was minor compared to how much we earned when we just simply showed up and then listed the property.
Right.
And at that moment, we got 2 weeks worth of points, and then and then the ratios changed, and we got lucky with the ratios, and so we ended up having all these points that ended up being worth more
Wow.
than what they originally were received for or what they intended them for, and so it just kind of like worked out.
Appreciation
after they got bought. Yeah.
Have you done any of that kind of
lucky.
home exchange later on, like in your future travels? Like, did you ever just do a straight up like exchange? Oh, your European villa for my house here in the States. Did you ever do anything like that?
We were trying that one actually right before COVID. We had a whole month planned for this last summer, and we had 2 months. We had a month where we would bounce around, do some exchanges and some even just purchasing hotels, and then others were on points. And then we had a month in Portugal. I think we were going to do all. I think that was the moment where we were going to spend all the leftover points that we had on those home exchange networks. But we did have some home exchanges happening in there. And yeah, one of the things, we ended up taking our own house off the listing, and then we ended up renting it because we found out at one point that there was like a Comic-Con was here in San Diego when we were living here. We didn't realize it at the time when we listed it. And then we were like, oh, like, let's back that out. And then we left, and I think we went to like, I don't know, Charlotte, North Carolina or somewhere. I can't remember where it was. We just decided we're going to leave and find a hotel somewhere with a pool and just let the kids play for the weekend. And we made like $1,000 off that weekend. We came back with more money than we left with because we spent points and we earned $1,000. So, we've done all the different kind of creative bits and pieces, some direct home exchanges and lots of points.
So we've heard about this strategy before where, you could like either go on travel yourself and then rent out your house as an Airbnb while it's being gone, and then you kind of pay for your vacation that way. We've thought about it ourselves, but what about like the sheets and blah, blah, blah. Because we do Airbnb ourselves, but, it's dedicated Airbnb units. But I'm wondering, like, how do you deal with that? Are you just okay with it? Is there like a separate area where you keep most of your personal effects? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Do you get nervous about having essentially strangers in a very personal, it's your home.
Yeah, for sure. And that's actually, it didn't bother me so much. Right. I was like, oh, let's
doesn't
just put
bother
the
me
valuables
either.
Together. Like, whatever.
I just said we to be nice.
Right.
Thanks, throwing me under the bus.
My wife was, the more pragmatic one. I think we talked about this, right? So but she was like, yeah, so how are we going to do this? I've got all this stuff that I don't want people like rifling through my drawers. And I'm like, oh, okay, good point. So what we ended up doing is we bought these 3 big bins, and we just took anything, and she's really great with organization. So we put it all together, organized it, put it in these 3 big bins, and then just put it in the garage and locked the garage. End of story. So yeah, it worked out really well. And the garage that we had at the time didn't have any other entrances other than just the one with the lock. So it wasn't like you could get in from the house or anything like that. So that's how we did that. And we got really good at it, actually. After a while, we could pack up in like a couple hours, like, or less, maybe an hour, just put everything we wanted in here. And we had we would use those bins to hold the sheets that we would use for the Airbnb or for whatever our home exchange. So we would just take them out, put them on, and then after the people left, we'd wash them, and then we'd swap all the stuff and put all the stuff back in the bin.
Smart
and
system.
Ready to go.
It worked out. She was good like that. So
yeah, no, that's really cool. And I know like you're in a popular area, San Diego, I feel like everyone's traveling there. We're also in a popular area in New York City. So like when we created our Airbnb, we were still unsure. Are people going to really be here? Because we were like 20 minutes out in northern Jersey. But, we were booked like crazy. Do you have to like plan out your vacation like 2 months ahead of time and list it on Airbnb, and then, then someone will book it? Or it's like, oh, I want to go to North Carolina tomorrow. I'm just going to pop this on Airbnb and I'll be good. How is it for you? Do you have to give some kind of time?
Yeah, it depends. I think it depends on the time of year. Like we have some pretty good size events here in San Diego,
Okay.
Comic-Con being the big one. I mean, that's like a good week or two of
So
just
is that like a
craziness.
yearly thing now? Oh, Comic Con's coming. We got to get out of the house and make some money.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love
Absolutely.
that.
And-
No, that's
yeah.
awesome.
And one year I totally forgot about it, and so we were living downtown, and I was looking down, I was working, and we had the windows open. I looked down, and I saw this like huge, like I'm talking like 8 foot, scraggly looking bunny rabbit with like huge fangs, and I was like, "What is going on?" I totally forgot that Comic Con was going on, and I was like, "Oh, okay, it's Comic Con." So yeah,
Darn it.
had no
Why
idea.
did I forget?
Yeah, I mean, I think with some of these places, like with San Diego, it's kind of nice because everybody wants to come. And so it can be very easy to rent our place out. But with other places that we lived in a place that was in the Northwest. It was 9,000 people it was a very small town. Thankfully, it was somewhat touristy, but I mean, it wasn't San Diego, right? You're not, so but when we listed it, like what we ended up doing is we kind of transitioned instead of doing from like nightly things, we would just do it for like a week or two, because what we found was people, when they were coming to the smaller towns, they actually just wanted to stay for longer. They didn't want to be there for a night or two. It's not like they were coming to see, like, go out to the bars for a night and then leave. Like no one goes to a small town to do that. They go to relax. And so we ended up doing weekly rentals instead, and it ended up way, way better. And so we found that when we kind of positioned it that way, we would get the pickups from rentals quite a bit faster than otherwise. And so I think for us, a lot of times it was a benefit. Like we would just say, "Oh, we're leaving," and because we would do things on points, and because we would do things kind of spontaneously, at least in the past. When we had fewer kids, it was a nice to have. It was like, oh, if we can rent it out, cool. And if we can't, then no big deal.
Right.
But now I think it's one of these things, like I got a newsletter that said that Antigua is from LAX to go to Antigua was $385 round trip. And I was like, that's incredible. I'm like, I want to do it. Right. And you can book it in December. But the thing is that the logistics in my head were, okay, well, we have this big house now. I say big, like it's big for us. It's not really that big, but we have this house that we then have to worry about, like doing all that same kind of logistics that we're not prepared for anymore. And we have 3 kids instead of, we had 2, but one was like an infant. So it was much easier.
Right.
And it's just the logistics are harder. So it's like, okay, can we rent this out for the whole month? Because Antigua is relatively expensive accommodations wise. So unless we find a deal that we can do points or, a hotel or something that's a sweet deal, then it's going to be a lot harder. So I think as we've gotten older with the kids and everything, we've kind of had to plan that out a bit more.
Right.
I think, going to your point about having the kids and traveling and how do you do that with 3 kids, I'm telling you, like, traveling with an infant is the easiest thing ever.
Yeah.
It's not that big of a deal. Like people make it a big deal, and it's like it's so easy.
Right. But yeah, once you have the 3 kids, I feel like, especially like, okay, right now we're both dealing with 2 kids and 1 infant. So the infant usually travels kind of free, but to get like 4 tickets now with 2 kids, 4 tickets on points, that's so hard. You have to have a lot of points. But we just did it, actually. We just booked a trip to Las Vegas to do a national park tour. And I was so excited because we were like, it was on United, and when I was looking at it, it was like 85,000 miles to fly from Newark Airport to Las Vegas. And I was like, oh man, I only have 83,000 miles. So I just need 2,000 more. And I don't want to pay for them because then it's not worth it. But then, I heard actually you mentioned this trick of, I heard on Tuesdays, it resets and it can become lower. So we waited on Tuesday and it went from 85,000 miles to 55,000 miles for all 4 tickets. So it was like 13,000 miles each, something ridiculous. To do a round trip from Newark to Las Vegas, and so we booked it.
That's awesome.
We did do it. And we've done other trips, but it is hard once you have to do like 4
Multiple
tickets
people,
or 3 tickets or 5 tickets.
So
I
think that's the hard part with the redeeming of those miles. Like the collecting of them. You got to be organized, but the redeeming of them, that's the tricky one. Like that can take some time. And I think that's where it trips up a lot of people.
So
when
time
they
and
first
the
started
strategy. It definitely does
Yeah.
take an element of strategizing.
Yeah. But having like more freedom in your life, like homeschooling, you don't have to center that around peak travel time, so it is more doable, but still gets more challenging.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I love that. I love that story. The creative thinking of, okay, I'm going away, so what am I going to do with what I'm leaving behind, my house and so forth. Just a very practical question. Are you guys very minimalistic, or how do you deal with home clutter? And just do you make effort to make the house seem more professional, or does it just remain very homey for whoever it is that's coming in?
I wish we were more minimalistic. I think compared to some people we are, but I think, when you say minimalist, I think of like the documentary or at least some of these things that are out there, and I'm like, we're not that.
I think of like a staged Airbnb that has all the things you want, but nothing that you don't need, which is not a very realistic way of living life. So
yeah, we're definitely in more of a realistic way of living life, kind of a family. We do, because we've moved quite a lot. We do try and keep things as low as possible. And especially when like every year or two, I think everybody kind of used to do this cleanse every spring or whatever. We've really tried to look at it and go, okay, are we going to be moving in the next like 6 months to a year? And if so, we start, donating everything that we can think of. And even now, like I actually watched that minimalist documentary, and I like the challenge of like looking at it and going, oh, okay, well, as you're walking around, pick something up that you probably won't miss, and like once a day, and like then the next day maybe do 2, and then the next day 3 or something like that. I like the idea. I try and do it like once a day, but I'm not great at it. But I try and do that just because it makes you aware. So in terms of staging, no, we keep ours. We try to think of it more of like, you've come into our home, but we want this to be your home, right? So we make it very comfortable, but we don't, strip out everything and down to the bare bones. Right. It's not a hotel, that's why they're using an Airbnb, is because it's more comfortable. So we kind of play in that direction.
Nice. Yeah. Okay, that's a good little tip, because I've always wondered that, when I've heard of these kind of home exchanges, I'm like, do they like go through their house right before and just like all the pictures off the wall, all the stuff off the shelves, make it, like a hotel? Yeah. But that's good to know.
We take our family pictures down and things like that, partially because they're valuable to us. Yeah. And then partially because it's like
personal.
It's ours, right? And and we do want to, it's almost like staging a house to be bought. Like we want you to think like this is your place, right? So we do take some of those personal items out, but and generally speaking, we don't have like, big, huge bookshelves of books that we've read and nobody cares about, right? Or those kinds of things. We don't have anything like that we really keep in the forefront that would make people feel like they're in somebody else's home. We try and make it feel like you're in your own home as best as possible, even though we don't know who you are. So.
Well, I love that. I love that creative way of traveling, and especially slow traveling. That's something that we still want to delve into at some point, but definitely the accommodations has been a gray area for us, is figuring out how to do that logistically. So you've given us several cool ideas to, ponder on now regarding that. I'm curious about like sightseeing and adventures you do on your travels. Do you do a lot of that, or you basically just kind of go and live life like the locals?
Yeah, we try and do both. I mean, if you're going to be in Paris, you're not going to not go to the Eiffel Tower, right?
Yes.
So we do both. We actually really enjoy getting to know the people in the community. We try really hard to like learn their names. We try to find a place that we like, and we go to that same place every day. I mean, we're only going to be there for 3 weeks to a month, and it's not like you're going to get to be best friends with them. We are trying to have some meaningful relationships while we're traveling, though, at the same time. And I think that's part of life, is having those meaningful relationships. And you don't know if you're going to end up being best friends with them or not. But for us, it's, if we see the same person every day, and if we are trying to speak their language, they appreciate it, even though they probably know English maybe better than I do, but they appreciate, our attempt at being a part of their culture. And so we order the things that they order, and we, try to speak their language, and we try to teach our kids the same thing. And so for us, we try to live as much like the locals as we can. Mm-hmm. And then what we end up doing is, I think with kids, what we've ended up doing is spend about 2 to 3 days of like kind of, there's like a rest day, there's like a play day where we'll go to like a park or something like that for the kids. And then I can't remember, sometimes we kind of bounce around, but maybe another rest day, but depending on how long we're there. But then we do something that's like more touristy. Like we'll do the red bus in double-decker bus in London. And that'll be almost always, that's our first thing that we do now, because we found as much as touristy as that is, you get a really good lay of the land. And it's not that expensive either. And I don't know, it gives you a lot of information. So it's fun to do that. And then we focus in and we're like, okay, and we all kind of join in. Where do you guys want to go? Do you want to go to the Louvre? Do you want to go to this? And so the kids, before we even show up to the country, they already know kind of some basics. So for instance, when we decided to go to England for a couple of weeks, we were in London, and we had months before had chosen a Premier League soccer team, football team to watch. And so we got baked into Crystal Palace. That was our team. And we would watch Crystal Palace, and the kids would get up and early in the morning, and we'd watch it all together as a family. And then we showed up and we went to a Crystal Palace game.
Oh, nice.
And, the kids were like getting signatures from the players and like pictures. And it was like, we were at the stadium, and it was super fun. And I think it just makes that experience so much more rich. So we kind of try and do both, really.
Knowing where you're traveling, do you try to cater your kids' education toward that country a few months in advance before going in order to maximize their experience there? Like, do you work on the languages with them ahead of time, study the culture and the foods, or do you just kind of wing it and say, let's go discover?
Yeah, mostly the former. Like, we don't, with the kids, it's hard to kind of just discover. Sometimes we're not quite that free form,
right.
but we do, even to this day, like I still love France. And so, I'm terrible at French right now, but I try to, I don't know, I should say right now, I have always been terrible at French, but I try to like help the kids learn it, because I'm like, I wish that our system, our school system, or our curriculums or anything like that, I wish we had something where we could, teach them another language. So many cultures are bilingual at least, and we're not. And I find I think it's going back to the empathy thing. I think it's really valuable to have experiences of other cultures, and part of that is the language. If you hear a word and then there's no direct translation, that's really interesting, because then you're like, well, then what is it? And it's a little of this and a little of that, but kind of more like this. And you're like, well, why would you even come up with that word? Why don't you just say this? And it brings on really interesting discussions about where those words came from. And when we went to England, for instance, we not a different language, but we don't have castles in San Diego. so we taught them all about knighthood and like the castles, and why, and the queen, and why do they have the parliament system, and like different things. I mean, Kai's 10, and I think we went there when he was 8, and it was just one of those things where we knew that it was going to be so different, and so we wanted to prep them and be like, we know you're going to ask all these questions, and that's not going to stop anyway, but we might as well prep you ahead of time and be like, hey, here's the basics. Like, and so then when he goes in, he kind of knows, he's like, oh, that's the guard that we've been talking about, where they do the change and why they do the change. And so it becomes more rich when we've told him the story or read the books of, and then you go there and they see it for themselves, and they're like, their minds are blown. And that's what I love to see is,
I mean, that learning is what's going to remain, it's not rot memorization and then forget about it. It's real genuine experience that will stick with you. I love that.
Exactly. Yeah.
So Nate, we've been talking a lot about travel. We know you're a smart guy. You're a chief technology officer. You've consulted huge businesses, Microsoft, Activision, Blizzard, Land Rover, all these things. And now, you have this passion for travel, and traveling cheaply that makes sense efficiently. And we know, one of the main things we're excited to bring you on for is, a new product that you've launched to help people travel better, especially, when you can't use points or it just becomes so hard. Eventually you do have to just pay money and book things. And when you want to do that, you want to book it for the cheapest possible way. So, you've made this Chrome extension, you made this website called Roomsteal. Do you want to explain more about that and how people can use that to travel more cheaply, better, efficiently?
Yeah, sure. So if you don't mind, I'd like to tell a little bit of why I built it.
Yeah, go for it.
I think it sheds some light on the both the journey, but also the reason why it exists, right? So as you said, being a technology guy, I've kind of bounced around and been a consultant, but I started working in some travel space and building platforms for some of the travel industry providers, some hotel brokerage and things like that. And in doing so, a couple of years back, I had learned about this source of hotel inventory, these hotel room rates that existed. And I was confused by them because I saw them and I was like, well, these look really, really cheap. Like, I don't get it. Like, why are these any different? And so I started asking these questions, and I couldn't quite understand why can I book these? And so I was asking all these questions to my CEO, and he was like, yeah, you can book them. And I was like, okay, well, how come I'm not seeing these anywhere else? And so I started to learn what happens in the industry. And so to start with, there's these agreements with the hotels and the online travel agencies. And I won't bore you with the gory details as to why this exists like way back in the day. But basically what happens is you have this separate inventory source that is kind of like a wholesale market of hotels. And the hotels, basically, they'll put up a wholesale rate. And it's a completely different rate than you would see online. And the agreement with the hotel and the online travel agency industry is that the prices need to be the same. So it's called rate parity. And so everywhere you look, you're going to see pretty close to the same price almost anywhere, 123 to 127, some couple dollars here and there. What I was seeing, though, was, for instance, I have two examples that I use over and over again. I saw one in Portugal and I saw one in Las Vegas, and they were $3,000 a night penthouse suites. I cannot afford $3,000 a night penthouse suites. No. Don't ask me why I was looking at this. I have no idea, but I saw it, but I decided I was going to compare, and I looked, and it was $300 a night.
Whoa!
Wow!
And I was like, we're not talking like a couple bucks. We're talking 90% difference, right? And I'm like, this is just incredible. Why is this not out there? And it's because of those industry agreements that say that if it's a public rate, so if you don't know who the user is that's on the site, but you want to display the rate for the hotel and the dates. So those three things: rate, hotel, and dates. If it's public, it all has to agree with rate parity agreements, those rules that set those dates or set those rates. If it's considered a CUG, a closed user group, and a good example of this might be your corporate rates. You might get a corporate rate or a member rate or something like that would be kind of hidden from the public, but you might get it separately. So the closed user group is kind of indifferent in terms of who it is that has it, but you can create these closed user group models and then access the inventory that's wholesale only. So what's happening with the $3,000 and $300 a night difference is Expedia or Booking.com or whoever is buying that $300 a night hotel and selling it to you for $3,000 a night because its rate parity says it has to be $3,000. They used to get paid on commission, but that is a margin play. And so they'll buy the wholesale rate instead of sell you the retail rate and get it like a 10% or 18% commission. They get $2,700 instead of,
and they're, I guess they're banking on someone picking that room up, but they probably have to eat a lot of those if they don't get them booked. Is that?
Well, they'll book it real time. So they're not buying them ahead of time. There are other organizations in the whole industry, and this goes really deep, but they're called bed banks, and they buy and sell wholesale rates amongst themselves. And so there's a whole ecosystem behind it. Well, when I learned all about all this kind of thing, I was kind of upset. I was like, wait a minute, I've probably been paying for a hotel. Like, granted, like I use points, right? But I've probably been paying for hotels. And so has a whole lot of other people for how long? Like, and you're telling me I could have had access as an individual user, not associated with any big corporation, and I could have had these prices. Like, people should know this, right? Like this, it upset me. I was like, this is ridiculous. So when I learned it, I said to my boss at the time, I was like, hey, we should do this. And he was like, no, it won't work. I'm like, okay, sign here. I want to go do it. And he's like, okay, fine, you go do it. And so that's kind of how it came to be. And so I'm using some of that technology and some of those resources to be able to do that. And we're flipping the whole model. So instead of taking any money on the individual reservations, which is what every other platform does. They all take money on a per reservation basis. So it's either margin or commission. We don't take anything. So what we do is we make it more like Costco. So you buy a subscription, a membership for a year, and then you can have as many reservations for basically free at that point, as much as all you can eat kind of a
And
thing.
when you say like everyone else, you're kind of talking things like Priceline, Expedia, and like Hotels.com, things like that, like these hotel search engines where you can see rooms.
Yep. Every single other player. Okay. There's schemes that exist that are like, oh, if you pay us $1,600 as a setup and then maybe like $600 a month, we'll give you access to these amazing rates, right? Well, how are you ever going to recoup that unless you are going to huge luxury places and doing it a lot, right? Or they might say, for instance, hotels.com, they'll say, we'll give you one free one if you book 10. Well, they're doing the same thing. They're just taking the margin on all of 10 that you bought and then giving you the free one because they made so much money on the other 10, right? So they're really not losing that much from it. They're hooking you with the 10% off or the punch card kind of a thing. Priceline works similarly. They use the same exact kind of rates, but what they do is they say, normal is $3,000 a night penthouse suite. How much do you want it for? And you say, can I get it for 2,000? And they're like, well, we're buying it for 300. So yeah, you can, and you're like, I got a sweet deal. and they're like, I got a sweet deal, so theoretically in that case, everybody wins, right? But it's because they're kind of hiding the price. But the thing is that I saw it and I was like, well, there's no reason to hide the price. Let's make it transparent. So the only requirement is that you have to be a member. And being a member just means you have to log in. So for us, it just means you have to log in. Outside of that, I think you should see those prices.
Wow.
That's a fantastic thing. I feel like you saw a need and you saw the discrepancy there, and then you could turn that around and make it available to most people who, prior to today, I didn't even know this was going on behind the scenes, And
right?
so it is enlightening for sure. And also, I think a breath of fresh air for some people who want to travel but have really felt limited by accommodation costs, which seem pretty generically all the same price no matter where you look. It's like, well, I might get there for a good price, but then I got to pay $150 a night. I can't really do that, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, we were just looking for myself, because I mean, you're talking about penthouse suites. We're looking for something cheaper, and I was like, okay, let me look at this roomsteals.com thing and look at, because we're traveling to Las Vegas, and we're camping most of the nights, but the day we get there, I want to stay near the airport, and I was like, oh, how much can we get? And I was like, whoa. There's a room here that's normally like $60 a night and looks pretty good ranking, and it's like, oh, it's like $25. This is pretty sweet. So yeah, it seems pretty cool. And I like your model, because you do have that annual membership thing, but you can, before you kind of sign up, you can see all those rates and then say, oh, this deal is worth buying into this annual membership for, and that seemed really cool.
Yeah, I like the transparency.
And that's the thing I think that we wanted to make sure that we're always doing. Like, we wanted it to be transparent, honest, upfront. Like, this is how it works. Because, I mean, really, that's the reason why we built it in the first place. And we actually have had people say, hey, I want to see your rates, or I want to, compare all these things. Do you mind if I sign up and then just use the extension and browse around? And I'm like, yeah, go for it. In fact, we encourage you not to become a member until you see a great rate. And those wholesale rates are not necessarily everywhere either. They're not everywhere, and they're not all the time. They're based on supply and demand. So if a citywide event comes through, like Comic-Con or something like that, where there's no hotel rooms anyway, no one's going to be selling, even if there was availability, they're not going to be selling it as a wholesale rate. They're going to be retail anyway. So there's some caveats to it. But in general, we wanted to basically say, like, this is what the lowest price is that you could get it at. And there are places that have these wholesale rates and they're just not saying it. And I'm like, well, I think we should have it. And I think that people should be able to see the price, and then before they pay for our membership, make sure that they're covering it. And so we've had, like last week, we had a new member that signed up, and the very first reservation they did, they saved $500.
Wow.
I mean, it's just, and it happens all the time. It's like, if you're going to become a paying member, it's probably because you're going to find some sweet deal.
Yeah. Right. What is the membership?
That's what we want. Right now, it's $59.
And that covers the whole year?
Yep.
As many reservations as you want?
As many as you want. We're actually going to be changing that price in the next, I'd say, 30 to 45 days. We're going to up it to $99.
Okay.
Because we're just seeing so many people get so much value out of it. And everybody's told us, they're like, you could charge whatever as long as we still get our great deal. So we're going to up it. But we do grandfather everybody into any pricing that they've had in the past. So we actually have a couple of users who are still on the very early days when we were $1.99 a month. so
lucky for them.
Yeah. So I'd encourage anybody who wants to check it out, and then buy it for the year. But obviously, travel is difficult with COVID, so totally understand that. But I did want to say, like, for your members, I want to give you and your members a coupon code, if that's okay.
Yeah, that'd be
sure.
awesome.
Yeah. So just for, thanks for having me on, but so
can we title the coupon code like FAMVESTOR or something?
Definitely. Yeah. We'll make it FAMVESTOR. And what we'll do is we'll make it so that you get 20% off. So even if you don't, get today's price and it happens later, we'll do a 20% off deal. So it should bring it down quite substantially. So
awesome.
Even that, so we'll do that for you guys.
Thank you. That's
Sweet.
great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Nate, it's been so awesome. I feel like we are starting to go a little long, but I want to really dive in because you're such a creative guy. And I love what, you and your wife, I feel like, really mirrors like kind of what we're after too, and like our lifestyle. But I'm wondering, I'm thinking about my own kids, like we've started doing lemonade stands for them, like when they were little. I'm wondering, do your kids have any like entrepreneurial pursuits that you've kind of grown in them? Anything you can share with us that like kind of highlight that a little bit?
Yeah, they do. I'm naturally going to bake as much of that in as I can, right? I find it very valuable. So, my oldest was trying to buy, he wanted to buy a robot. And so, okay. Yeah. So we were looking around and we found some at Target that were like $50, but we found this one that was, I think it was $100, I think. And I was like, okay, this is going to take some time. You're going to have to figure out how to do this. And so we talked about all the different kind of like pieces, like, you want to, if you're going to sell something, you want to know that you have a sale. Don't guess, right? Like make sure that you're getting the right demand and who it is, who's your target market. So we ended up coming up with this idea, and it was just to, so I'll tell you the process because it's more fun. So we texted my boss at work, and he likes these donuts, these very particular donuts from a very particular shop. And we said, well, what donuts do you like? Which ones? And he listed off 5 or 6. So I said, okay, Kai, here's what you do. You go, you buy the donuts, you bring them in, but wait, don't bring them in whenever, bring them in right before lunchtime. And it ended up being right before lunchtime and right before he was going on a flight. And so he came in, and my business partner was in town, and my business partner is great about this. He's like, no, you got to tell the story too. So why are you doing it? So we've got the whole marketing pitch, right? So like, I'm a 10-year-old kid. I'm trying to save up for a robot. Would you please buy my donuts? And by the way, I'm right here before lunch. So we kind of primed him up, but he came in and he went through that place and he sold every single donut. And then he came back. He actually ended up liking doing that so much, he made his own Rice Krispie treats with big bars and everything, and he came back and sold his own, bought his own. We made sure that he paid for his own materials and the donuts and everything. So he had easily enough at the end of that, those two, to buy that robot.
I love that. And he was 10 years old doing this.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. I mean, on so many levels, helping you overcome, fears of talking to people, being able to sell a product and just
taking ownership of the whole thing. I have this want, teaching him, you have the tools within yourself to materialize that. And then the ownership that comes from, okay, I worked hard for this, now I'm going to care for this position like it's my own, because it is his own. He earned it. Right. And just so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it was fun to watch him do it, and let's watch his again. Seeing his eyes light up is just that was it.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, Nate, thank you so much for coming on the Fan Investor podcast. I guess one question I want to leave the audience with from you is, if people listen to this podcast and maybe they're a young family just starting out, what do you hope they kind of get inspired about and to do?
Well, I mean, I think this kind of falls in line with the theme. I think there's two things that I would encourage anybody to do. One is going to be travel, because I think it just opens your eyes and you learn a lot. You have empathy. You also get to go through struggles in travel. It's tough sometimes, and you have to figure out and be creative of, how to work your way out of it or figure it out. Especially back in the day when we were traveling before iPhones and stuff, you had to figure this stuff out. And I still think that there's times where you run into those situations that even with all the digital access we have, there's still some struggles, and it's a good struggle to have. But the other is, I truly believe that, that if people do have, I think everybody has their own unique qualities and their own traits. And some of this is service, some of it's product, some of it's all these kinds of things. But I think everybody has the capability to run their own business. And I think everybody should to some degree. They don't need to do it the way I do it or anything like that. But even just learning how to sell something, the closer you, from a career perspective, the closer you can get to the source of that money. This is why salespeople make so much, because they are right at the edge of where the money comes in. They make a lot of money because they're right there. They understand the psychology of the individual. The further back you get, into the administrative work and that kind of thing, the further away you are and the less you make, right? So I would encourage anybody to get closer and closer to where the source of the money is that's coming in from anybody. And that you're always going to have a boss, in the sense I have a boss right now, but I also have a partner. And I also have, when I'm running my own companies, my boss is the customer, right? So I think that if you change your mentality about work, it changes it changes how you can earn, and it changes the value system that you can start placing. You can start to see what is valuable for another person. And when you understand that value, and this is something I'm actually teaching my kids, is what is value. Dig into that word and really try and figure that out, because when you understand that, you'll be fine. You will be fine. There's nothing else you need in life in terms of the Western capitalist society we live in right now. There's nothing else you really need to understand other than what value really is for you and for somebody else. If you get it and you understand what that value is for somebody else, you're good. You can figure out whatever you need to figure out to deal with that.
Yeah, totally agree. Nate, if people want to reach out to you, find out more, what's the best way to get in touch?
Well, you could go to NateRitter.com. You could go to, I'm on Twitter quite a bit. So Nate Ritter on Twitter. You can email me, Nate@roomsteals.com. I'm everywhere as Nate Ritter. So yeah, I'm out there.
Awesome, Nate. It's been so fun talking. Really enjoyed it. And thank you so much for coming on the Fan Investor podcast.
Thank you.